And with that, I am very excited to introduce our first and our one and only male speaker today. Thank you, Neil. I know that got a chuckle out of you earlier. I don't know you personally, but your name with the ICR group, who I've been part of for the probably past 20 or more years, your name comes up frequently. So I may not have met you, but I do feel that I know you at least by name a little bit. We're very excited to hear your talk today, because again, it'll make that reference of ancient poetry and pulling it into today's day and age, and to see the references of Kundalini going back so far. So we are very excited to hear you talk about that. I was also fascinated to read of your other interests, how very much environmentally driven they are, and that you've been able to incorporate that into your career in environmental technology. I did ask Neil to share a little something personal about himself that's not in the bio, and he did share with me that he lives in the mountains of Arizona, where they get annual monsoon rains. So there we have it. It looks like the sun might be shining today. I'm just about to get a thunderstorm here, so whatever thunderstorm was over at Mike's earlier, it seems to be coming my way. I will mute myself so that you don't hear that. But thank you, Neil. We welcome you. Do you want me to also give you an early heads up? I'll probably give you a heads up at 30 minutes in, when it comes time for Q&A, if that works for you. And you're still muted.
Thank you, Sabine. That would be great.
All right, will do. Well, welcome, Neil, and we look forward to your talk about Kundalini and sacred poetry.
So thanks to ICR and Paul and Dale. Sorry to hear she's got some sciatica bothering her. Thanks to Mike and Vitoli and all the speakers. I enjoyed hearing Terry's talking about Gopi Krishna, and it's very personal for me. And Archana, it was really nice to have not just the poem, but the video. It was great, nice piece of art. And Anne, getting introduced to a system or a theory, if you will, that I'm not familiar with, and is very interesting. Francis, thank you for kind of invoking the planetary spiritual reality that we all live in. And so I guess I'm going to do a share screen and a slideshow. So let's see if I can do that. Okay. And let's see here. Let me go to slideshow. And okay. So I'll just go down here. Kind of an outline. That is a graphic of Quetzalcoatl. And Quetzalcoatl is Aztec, and I think shared by the Mayans and Toltecs. That is the Kundalini of Central America and Mexico. The name literally means snake bird, and is the legendary uniter of civilization, so kind of mythologically reputed to be. And so I'm going to talk about Gopi Krishna a little bit, my experience, some other poems. We'll see how far we get. I'm happy to answer any questions that may come up. So you're all familiar with this. I just thought I'd throw the graphic in there. The Kundalini, of course, sits in India, said to be wrapped 3.5 times around the base of the spine. The word Kundalini actually means coiled. And so just a reminder of that. Gopi Krishna, in 1937, part of his awakening included he was walking a woman home, and they were crossing a bridge, and he went into a kind of a trance state. And this is common for those who have been really fully awakened from Kundalini. And it's kind of a joke, really. It's I had a physics professor in high school who during class stepped accidentally into a wastebasket, and he was writing something on the board, and he just kept writing. And that's what I think of when I think of the fully awakened state of Kundalini. There's a story about Gopi Krishna, who had gone to the city where he lived. He'd gone into the center of town, do some shopping. His assistant drove the wagon. And so the assistant got out, went to buy something, told Ramakrishna, I'll be right back. So he came back and he couldn't find Ramakrishna. And he looked everywhere. And after many hours, he found him. And Ramakrishna said to him, how could you leave me alone like that? And again, it's when in order to write poetry, at least as I do, and as Gopi Krishna did, is there's a kind of a contemplative trance-like state. And one becomes in that state oblivious to the external world. And out of that can come a poem. And it kind of just floats into the mind. And so it's one of the aspects of the Kundalini awakening that one goes into these states, and out of it can come poetry. And Krishna was very interesting. When he started to write poems in languages he didn't speak, German, French, and Italian, I think also Sanskrit and Persian. And after a while, he just found that too difficult, too much of a struggle. So he wrote in English. Now, he also wrote in Kashmiri, and I'm not at all familiar with those languages, but it's interesting how you could write a poem in a language that you don't speak, and it says something about the source of this. And ultimately, he wrote 3 books that are single poems that I'm familiar with: The Riddle of Consciousness, The Shape of Things to Come, and The Way to Self-Knowledge. And of the 3, I particularly like The Way to Self-Knowledge. I believe that's the last book that he wrote. But it's a single poem, and I have The Present Crisis. What is it called? The Shape of Things to Come. I have The Present Crisis, which he wrote, and it's 100 and I'm just looking at the pages here, 193 pages. It is one poem. So let me just read a brief passage from there of this poetry, which is this spiritual, mystical poetry. Ah, what clouding of the intellect to hold a product of capricious chance, who has no mark of authenticity, no stamp attested to his genuineness, no firm position in the universe, as worth the slightest credence for the thought expressed about the cosmos and himself. But strange to say, this freak is much esteemed, his counsels listened to, his views imbibed, his books avidly read, his art admired, his person too is honored and revered by millions, in a famous statesman or distinguished scholar, priest, musician, discoverer, artist, saint, explorer, or inventor, and in 100 other roles. Some are impressed so well by his exploits that they nigh worship him as their ideal. His picture keeps changing, his picture keep up hanging in their rooms or even abiding in their loyal hearts. At no time do they have the slightest thought that they bow but to an alchemical toy. Let me go on. Myself, in 1973, I was a freshman in college, UC Berkeley, and I was at a Halloween party at a fraternity, believe it or not, and I had to retreat from the party. I went upstairs to the third floor. I borrowed a bedroom, and I laid down on the bed in kind of a, what would I say, like I was, a birth pose, just coiled up, and I felt I was, without going into a great deal of detail about it, I was under a tremendous amount of pressure, social, family, financial, all of it, and I was frightened by what I felt, and then at the base of my spine, I felt a release. And that release was of all of these psychological pressures, and it just all of a sudden vanished. Pressure was gone. And I didn't have any sense of my body. I felt an acceleration of energy that really was an ecstatic sensation. And it rose within me, up my spine. And finally, I was at the apex of what I thought was this experience. And then I slipped into a cluster of stars. And I perceived the stars, and I was the stars. So there's no difference between subject and object. And after an undeterminable period of time, I came down back into my body, down, felt all the pressures reapplied, and then opened my eyes and woke up, and I was back in this bedroom. It was a kind of a strange, I could perceive a white light in my abdomen, what I would now call the dantian, which is the center of the qi in Chinese belief. And came back to my body and tried to go back to school, and it was just like my consciousness had expanded. I had become very psychic, and a month later, Thanksgiving, I go back up to where home is, the Russian River, north of San Francisco. And I'm in a metaphysical bookstore, and here's this book, and I take it off the shelf, and it's Kundalini Yoga, and I open it to the first chapter and start reading, and lo and behold, I'm reading of the Kundalini awakening of Gopi Krishna, and it was like, yeah, that's it. That's what I just experienced. So I bought the book, read it, and this is how I learned about Kundalini, because I had never heard the word before this happened. I learned meditation when I was 12 years old. We had an English teacher, and of course, you know, if you had 12-year-olds in your class, you might want them to learn meditation too. So he taught us how to meditate. He taught us about the Purusha, and it's very interesting. And I learned a lot from that. And prior to this occurrence with the awakening of the Kundalini, I had been reading, I'd read Castaneda's books. They were coming out, so I was reading them as they come out at that time. I read Aldous Huxley, Doors of Perception. So I was very curious about this whole area. But that, you know, thus began, I dropped out of school, dropped into life, as I said. Took a year and a half off, went back to school as a literature major, and at University of California, Santa Barbara. And then I didn't like the program I was in, so I wound up becoming an environmental studies undergraduate, and spent the next 5 years studying that and writing poetry about solar and nuclear energy and stuff like that. So it was some years during this 5 or so years. When I would go to bed at night, I would see energy moving around inside my body, and I saw it. It was just as Gopi Krishna had described it. A flutter of a muscle and a sensation that would go from, say, my shoulder to my abdomen to my foot, and on and on and on continuously. And it was as if Kundalini was, the energy was loose in my body and it was remaking me. And that's how I felt. And during that time, I did get involved in, my one big social cause was, I joined the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. And this was the 1970s. So that was a long time ago. Today I'm 66 years old. So it's 48 years ago. And in that time, I've actually got 3 books of poetry published. And but I want to just talk about the poetry. So this is the first poem that I wrote. I was standing in an apple orchard along the Russian River where there's lots of apples. Again, I kind of went into this contemplative state, and these pruned apple trees in winter, they look to me like nerve cells, you know. And the words just flowed into my mind, clutching that inner crystalline reality in gnarled claws, reaching for the spot where the truth lies, to touch it and listen to the crisp sizzling as realization burns a fire. Somehow its long warthog arms make us feel enclosed in years of bark. And that was the first poem that I wrote. I'd written a poem when I was 14 for an English class. Other than that, I'd never written any poetry. And this came in, and what this is describing, the crisp sizzling as realization burns a fire, was this post Kundalini awakening. I was realizing many truths, just stuff I had no reason to know about or understand. Just knowledge was just coming to me, and it was happening through this process, this internal process. So that's how it started. Now this is my first book, and so again, the nature of this poetry is it's coming from the contemplation of mystical reality, philosophy in the universe. So the sacred poetry specifically refers to poetry about religion, religious subjects, and that kind of genre of subject matter. So this one here, when the conflict strikes between desire and obstacle, in the midst of chaos, an echo is heard, cry of a bird, and the spirit flies free. The heart that opens, one eye to the round world, finds a place unmolested by cares and concerns, a place uncontested where the spirit flies free. In the cosmic maelstrom of duties and progress, The pull of the heavens overcomes the earth's hold as one's wings unfold and the spirit flies free. So this is the titled poem of a book. Now, I wanted to show a few examples. I didn't, and I have yet to write any poetry in languages that I don't speak. But what I have done is written some poems using words I don't know the meaning of. So this poem came to me. I was sitting at a table in the dining room of a home. And I don't know why I was thinking about this. In fact, I really wasn't thinking much of anything. The poem just came to me. Turn to touch the shadow of the fleeting horse and know that it is forgotten into the night. And the title was Moribund Delicacy. I didn't know what moribund meant. I had to look it up. And moribund means having to do with death, relating to death. And so that one line, turn to touch the shadow of the fleeting horse and know that it is forgotten into the night. The fleeting horse is life. And this is the consciousness of the act of dying. So as we die, life is like this horse that's running away from us. So I had no idea what moribund meant. I had to look it up. The second one here, hiatus. I had no idea what hiatus was. Flowering daffodil, rain over my poor, tired, humbled body. Kiss me with your sweet, gentle waters. Replenish my soul. So I looked up the word, and at first I came across hiatus. I thought, well, the meaning doesn't fit. Well, it turns out hiatus is Greek for rain. Just a couple of examples, and there's a third example that I find so interesting. I'm going to share this with you. So the name of the poem is a puddle that catches the truth. And so here's this poem. A poem is a puddle that catches the truth, that runs off the soil when it rains, sweet love of nature and art, falling outrageous forsooth. I need to empty it onto the page as Aquarius pours harmony, so that should love's renewal call company, aquarium fish feel their age. As for machines of whimsy designed, pinwheels and bicycle frames, before love's reign of irony falls, deep mandolin heartstrings unwind. The first time I wrote this poem, the last line of the second stanza says aquarium fish feel their age. The first time I wrote it, I wrote aquarium fish feel the rage. And I couldn't figure it out because why would, love and renewal and what does rage have to do with that? And it finally hit me, oh, I get it. It's not aquarium fish feel the rage, it's aquarium fish feel their age, the age of Aquarius. So I had split the word in the wrong place. And so the experience for me is, it's almost like being an archaeologist, right? You're digging in some place where there's old sculpture and who knows, maybe there's some ancient symbols, words. And you have a little brush and you brush off the dirt and you try to see it clearly to see what it is. So that is what the act of poetry writing is for me. Because I can't say that I write these poems because they come to me, I transcribe them, but I'm not the author. I can't have any illusions about that. So let me go on here. Oops, here we go. So this is a book that I wrote, I think it was before the pandemic, published it a few years ago. It was, when I wrote it, it was 27 pages, called Toward Integrity. And it's a metered rhyme poem, 27 pages. It took me a few days to write it. And again, it just kind of flowed when I was writing it. And what do I want to say about this? Toward integrity, it was embracing the idea that that all is one. So let me just read a short passage from this. We humans pride ourselves on our brains, so abstract, so imaginative, so destructive of nature and each other, when we are acting out in a childish tiff. Honestly, world wars, nuclear holocaust, invented by man, a completely self-destructive end to an otherwise brilliant plan. Surely we are still evolving, as always, as pointed out above. The true internal struggle of people is almost never the subject of human art and human science, the more blasé life being preferred, perhaps just lightly touched on in the theater of the absurd. So that was the second book, and that came to me as a single poem. And the metered rhyme, and I'll mention this later, the metered rhyme is in some sense, it helps because there's a rhythm and it makes it easier for me to hear the poem when it comes in a rhythm, in a rhythmic metered rhyme, because there's a pattern, there's a, I don't want to call it a structure because it's more of a flow, but there's a pattern to it and it's easier to write it. But I view it as channeling. And if you've ever seen somebody channel, and I've seen a couple of people channel, it's really not any different, in my opinion, than channeling, because you're just listening and you're writing down what you hear. And so Gopi Krishna, in his long book-length poems, some of them are like the Way to Self-Knowledge is metered rhyme, all of it. But another one, I think The Riddle of Consciousness, is free verse. So, and I think the free verse is more difficult because there's nothing, you have no ability to predict where the poem is going. You just have to listen, and you have to listen really hard. And for me, the most difficult thing is not to be distracted by your own thoughts, because it's easy to react to what you're hearing and say, oh yeah, that reminds me of this. But truly, it's like a Zen meditation. You just have to have an empty mind in order to hear. So, let me just move on quickly here. This is another one that I wrote recently, about a year ago. And the title came to me. I woke up and it's 100 pages. And I thought, well, surely that doesn't mean that the poem's 100 pages. It must refer to something in the poem. And I got to page 50 and I thought, this is going to go 100 pages. And it is about the state of the world, the ecological state of the world, climate change. And I discovered things in writing it, because as I would write it, it was like these new creative ideas would come to me. And I was literally learning from writing this poem. That's the third one. Now, anybody who's read RUMI knows that RUMI is, it's sacred poetry. It's also genius. And it's very hard to believe that RUMI was not, another one with an awakened Kundalini. And his is just, I'd like to read it. I'm afraid I'm going to run out of time, but if I wind up with extra time, I'll read a poem from RUMI, because RUMI is just brilliant, and he's the best-selling poet in the United States. Shakespeare is real interesting, because there are 37 plays they're all metered rhyme in iambic pentameter. And, you know, there are people who say, oh, well, Shakespeare didn't write all those plays. It was a committee of people from, you know, who knows, the Illuminati back in the 1500s. But as someone who has written some long poetry, I can tell you that if you get into the rhythm of iambic pentameter, and some of my poems are in iambic pentameter, you can just keep going. Yeah, Shakespeare is genius, of course. I mean, I don't think anybody would argue that Shakespeare is not genius, but the only explanation I have for Shakespeare is Kundalini. And so I want to read quickly here, let's see, a passage which we're all familiar with perhaps, but this is an example of this iambic pentameter, and I'll try to read it in such a way that it's obvious. It's the opening act of Richard III, and he writes, "Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious by the son of York, and all the clouds that lowered upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean buried. Now are our brows bound with victorious wreaths, our bruised arms hung up for monuments, our stern alarms changed to merry greetings, our dreadful marches to delightful measures." So, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, all iambic pentameter. "Grim-visaged war hath smoothed his wrinkled front, and now instead of mounting barbed steeds to fright the souls of fearful adversaries, he capers nimbly in a lady's chamber to the lascivious pleasing of a lute. But I, that am not shaped for sportive tricks, nor made to court an amorous looking glass, I, that am rudely stamped and want love's majesty to strut before a wanton ambling nymph, I, that am curtailed of this fair proportion, cheated of feature by dissembling nature, deformed, unfinished, sent before my time into this breathing world, scarce half made up, and that is so lamely and unfashionable that dogs bark at me as I halt by them." So 37 plays in iambic pentameter. The only way he could have written, in my opinion, based on my experience, is because of the iambic pentameter. It's the rhythm, it's the rhyme scheme, that gives his consciousness the impetus, the momentum to be able to continuously produce this amount of poetry. So another example, William Blake. You know, William Blake actually is considered one of the great British poets and artists. And let's see, here I've got a couple of, here they are. Search for these. We're mostly familiar with this one here. "To see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour." Blake was the son of a minister. He opposed all organized religion. These are just personalities these are genius poets. And for me, it's like, well, you know, Gopi Krishna wrote a book called The Biological Basis of Genius and Religion. And he argued that artistic genius was coming from Kundalini, although he felt, you know, there were sort of classes of it, right? A Muhammad or a Buddha or a Jesus was sort of the top class. Below that, there may have been other, you know, saints, and then below that there were artistic and creative geniuses, and below that they're scientists. And so to me, especially as you look at the lives of these people, how it touches on religion. In Dante's Inferno or Milton's Paradise Lost. These are other examples. But even the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu, which was written about 600 BC, in Chinese, it's poetry. So I am told by a very well-read Chinese person. So, you know, you go back to, oh gosh, much of what Muhammad said was based on his trying to come up with an answer to a question someone would ask him, and he would have to search for a poetic answer. So there's something in the poetry itself that ties into, that's of course Van Gogh on the right. Let's see, Sabine, how much time do I have?
I was just waiting for the right moment there. So we don't have any questions for Neil yet, but we're at the 5-minute time.
Okay.
The next presentation is starting at 4:15.
All right. Well, as I said, I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody may have. And I think I probably won't go into a great deal of theories of consciousness portion of this. I mean, anybody ever heard a theory of where poetry comes from? For me, I think that it must be true that poetry is mirroring patterns in the unconscious mind. These metered rhymes, for example, they don't come from nowhere. And particularly in the case of sacred poetry, they are thought to contain revealed truth. And so how is that possible? I mean, somebody give me an explanation for it. So the only thing that I can come up with is that in the unconscious mind, there are two things. One is there are patterns in the unconscious mind. And the other is that there is a connection in the unconscious mind to the collective unconscious. And at least some of what comes to those who channel this poetry, some of that comes from the collective unconscious. And now we're saying these are patterns that are not just in the unconscious mind, but they're in the collective unconscious. They're part of the universe, which I like. So I think I should probably, if there's no questions, didn't I say I was going to read Rumi? So I will read a poem by Rumi. And the name of this poem is Jesus on the Lean Donkey. And Rumi wrote about Muhammad, he wrote about Jesus. Jesus on the lean donkey. This is an emblem of how the rational intellect should control the animal soul. Let your spirit be strong like Jesus. If that part becomes weak, then the worn out donkey grows to a dragon. Be grateful when what seems unkind comes from a wise person. Once a holy man, riding his donkey, saw a snake crawling into a sleepy man's mouth. He hurried, but he couldn't prevent it. He hit the man several blows with his club. The man woke terrified, and he ran beneath an apple tree with many rotten apples on the ground. Eat, eat, you miserable wretch. Why are you doing this to me? Eat, you fool. I've never seen you before. Who are you? Do you have some inner quarrel with my soul? The wise man kept forcing him to eat, and then he ran him for hours. He whipped that poor man and made him run. Finally, at night, full of rotten apples, fatigued, bleeding, he fell and vomited everything, the good and the bad, the apple, and the snake. When he saw that ugly snake come out of himself, he fell on his knees before his assailant. Are you Gabriel? Are you God? I blessed the moment you first noticed me. I was dead and didn't know it. You've given me new life. Everything I said to you was stupid. I didn't know. If I had explained what I was doing, you might have panicked and died of fear. Muhammad said, if I described the enemy that lives inside men, even the most courageous would be paralyzed. No one would go out or do any work. No one would pray or fast. All power to change would fade from human beings. So I kept quiet while I was beating you, that like David, I might shape iron, so that impossibly I might put your feathers back into a bird's wing. God's silence is necessary because of humankind's faint-heartedness. If I had told you about the snake, you wouldn't have been able to eat, and if you hadn't eaten, you wouldn't have vomited. I saw your condition and drove my donkey hard into the middle of it, saying always under my breath, Lord, make it easy on him. I wasn't permitted to tell you, and I wasn't permitted to stop beating you. The healed man still kneeling, I have no way to thank you for the quickness of your wisdom and the strength of your guidance. God will thank you. So with that, I'll finish.
Neil, one question came in, which poem this excerpt was from, the Rumi poem?
Oh, that's Jesus on his lean donkey. I think that was the one. Now I've removed my bookmark, so now I'd have to find it again. But yeah, that's Jesus on his lean donkey. The book itself is the Essential Rumi. It's translated by Coleman Barks. But anything by Rumi is good.
So it's when a poem leaves you in silence, you know it's gone deep within. Yeah. Thank you, Neil. That was a wonderful journey through different poets that we can connect with, and an introduction to some poets that we may not be so familiar with. And just again, a beautiful demonstration of how this universal consciousness and Kundalini carries through the ages, through the artistries, and hopefully a little bit into all of us.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you for sharing.